Transitions, the podcast by Ostrum Asset Management.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this new episode of Transitions, Ostrum Asset Management's podcast. For 2,000 years, we have progressed without any significant constraints on the future of humanity. Today, we're reaching the planet's limits, compelling us to change our ways. Our era is marked by an unprecedented number of transformations that we must all adapt to, both individually and collectively, personally and professionally. Environmental, societal, governance, digital. These changes are happening simultaneously and accelerating continuously. What transitions are we facing and will continue to face? What challenges will individuals, governments, and businesses need to address? How is the asset management sector impacted? How has Ostrum AM adapted its organization and strategy to meet these changes? These are all questions that warrant an expert debate. I'm pleased to welcome Nathalie Beauvir, Director of Sustainable Transitions, and Philippe Waechter, Chief Economist at Ostrum AM. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
Hello, Clément.
So the global economy is undergoing a rapid transformation. There are two dimensions, the macroeconomic aspect and how economic players behave in such an environment. Philippe, let's start with the macroeconomic dimension. What challenges does the global economy face?
Well, the global economy is changing rapidly. During the globalization, since the beginning of the 80s, we have had a very long period which was very cooperative, very coordinated, and at the end of the day, it was a period during which the situation has improved almost everywhere. Look at China, look at India, and everywhere. With the pandemic and all the consequences of this pandemic, things have changed. Currently, we have three main challenges. The first challenge is associated with the imbalances coming from the globalization. On this challenge, 4 points. The first is focused on technology. During the globalization, we have had huge technological transfers from developed countries to Asia and specifically to China. And remember, in 2016, 2017, Donald Trump at the White House took measures against China because Chinese technological level was too high compared to the US. And this has not changed. We are still in a very competitive environment on technology between China and the US. That's the first point. The second point is that during the globalization, the world was quite horizontal. The world was flat, and we had opportunities almost everywhere. But with the pandemic and its consequences, just after, we have all realized that it was not sustainable anymore. We have to be able to innovate. We have to be able to develop our own technology, and we did not want to depend too much on China or elsewhere. So what we've seen is that from a world that was flat, the world became more vertical, and countries, the US, in Europe, in China, wanted to develop their own business, their own capacity to create production. So we have had the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, for example. So everyone wants to have an industrial policy to be able to manage its own target, its own possibilities, its own capabilities to be more autonomous. The third point is a new geopolitical equilibrium. Clearly, with the first 2 points I mentioned, plus the conflict we have had in Ukraine and in the Middle East, we see that US, Europe, India, China, or Russia do not play anymore with the same rules. And that's a real change. We have to think differently, and the bargaining power has changed dramatically. And the fourth point, in the first challenge, global challenge, is monetary policy. Central bankers have realized that zero interest rates policy very accommodative monetary policy was not really efficient. They don't want to come back on this point. That's the first point I wanted to mention with the challenge issue coming from the imbalance of the globalization. The second challenge is on demographic. Demographic has changed more rapidly than expected. And currently what we see, two things. The first is that in Eastern Asia, in Europe, population will shrink. In the US, population will continue to increase. So it means that the equilibrium between these three parts of the world will change dramatically. US will keep its power, but it will be complicated for Asia or for Europe to keep the same pace in the world economy. The second challenge in this demographic issue is the fact that in Europe specifically, we are getting old very quickly. So we have to think about the arbitrage of income between the working population and retirees. Working population is creating production and income, and these income are then distributed to retirees. We have to think about the equilibrium between the two, something that is very complicated at the current moment. And the third challenge is climate change. The European agency, Copernicus, said recently that 2024 will be the first year in which we will have a temperature, an average temperature that will be above the lower limit of the Paris Agreement. We will be above 1.5 degree compared to the pre-industrial period. That's important for two reasons. The first is that from 1.5 degree above the pre-industrial average, we see that on the global Earth, we have tipping points on Greenland, on Gulf Stream, on Arctic, and there is a kind of irreversibility in this change, and it starts at 1.5 degree. That's the first aspect. The second aspect is that we clearly have to change our behavior. We have to reduce dramatically our consumption of fossil fuels, because they are the main reason for this climate change problem. We have to do that very quickly to avoid converging to 2.5 or 3 degrees above the pre-industrial period. And the third point is that we have to invest a lot to be able to capture carbon. We will be above 1.5 degree for an extended period, but we have to try to stay close to this level. So we will have to capture carbon. We have to innovate a lot. We have to invest a lot to be able to keep that and to keep Earth viable. That's the three challenges: imbalances, demographic, climate change. And all these elements will clearly modify dramatically and deeply our way of living on Earth.
Thank you, Philippe. Nathalie, how do these challenges and the transformations that Philippe mentioned impact management practices of stakeholders such as Ostrum AM, and how are they taken into account?
Well, yes, Clément, all the major transformations Philippe mentioned and the way we actually want to support them de facto influence our management in terms of risk, opportunities, and impacts, ultimately affecting how we drive both the financial and non-financial performance of our funds. With public investment more uncertain than ever in a tense social and geopolitical context, the role of finance is more relevant than ever to ensure and to accelerate the financing of sustainable economy. However, the way we do this must evolve. Today, we see the limits of a Manichaean approach to transition based solely on exclusions. Limits in terms of financial performance by reducing the investment universe more and more, limits in terms also of availability and quality of data on which exclusions are based. I mean, these data may actually vary from one provider to another. And also limit in terms of impact. Excluding a company does not guarantee that it will raise its climate ambitions, but on the contrary, it may actually seek financing from other less scrupulous investors in terms of transition and in terms of ESG. Moreover, as Philippe reminded us, the transition must not be understood only from a climate perspective, but must also take into account other dimensions, such as the geographical, technological, social, or environmental dimensions. In other words, transition must be fair. As a result, all these major transformations and challenges require us to review our management practices and to move towards a more holistic, qualitative, and engaged approach of sustainability issues. All in all, and this is important, in a changing, polymorphic, and increasingly stringent regulatory context.
So Nathalie, you've outlined a certain number of practices, and these come with behaviors, obviously. If we go back to macroeconomics, Philippe, who has the ability to sway these behaviors in the financial markets?
Clearly, central banks will have to play an important role. In the US, the Federal Reserve is not very attentive to climate change, for example. Jay Powell said recently in a conference that it's the White House business. In Europe, the situation is different. Christine Lagarde really wants to have an impact on the European economic behavior due to what's happening on climate. And when the European Central Bank has think differently, its behavior, its strategic behavior, he said, well, we will include climate change in our target, in our goals. And that's very important because the central bank has a capacity to change behavior. You know, we will have, every company will have to publish measures like CSRD to say how I behave. And the central bank will be able to use this data to on markets. And so good behavior will have better condition on the monetary market, for example. So that's something very important, and the central bank clearly can go this way. The second aspect is that the financial system in Europe is quite strong. The European Central Bank has made some stress tests associated with climate change, from convergence to the net zero in 2050 to the transition from brown to green in the industry, and sometimes with strong shocks on the economy. Even with all that compact, I would say, the financial system is quite strong. And that's very important. That's something we all feared, waiting for what could happen if we change the situation too rapidly. The response from the answer from the ECB is to say, well, quite well, the financial system can accept all this change, all these upheavals we will have we will have in front of us, and that's very important and positive for us.
Thank you, Philippe. Nathalie, regarding this financial system, how does Ostrum AM plan to engage in the transition? How can we, as an asset management company, support this transition?
Yes, thank you, Clément. So our investment strategy to support the transition are based on several pillars, or should I say levers, that are complementary and interdependent. The first one is the development of exclusion policies relating in particular to fossil fuels. We have published a coal policy and an unconventional oil and gas policy, which include stringent quantitative thresholds. However, as I mentioned earlier, this lever is no longer sufficient, and we must operate others, among which ESG integration. This qualitative approach of the double materiality is realized by our credit analysts, who rely on their knowledge of sectors and issuers. More specifically, for climate, as we mentioned climate before, we have developed a proprietary methodology to evaluate the climate strategies of companies active in highly emissive sectors in order to assess their ability and their willingness to transition. The third lever is engagement, which actually can take various forms, such as the materialization of the net zero asset owner commitments of our clients, for which we manage a significant percentage of assets with a decarbonization target, either in terms of carbon footprint or carbon intensity reduction, or in terms of temperature alignment. The implementation of our own climate commitment, as we're currently studying options to join the Net Zero Asset Manager initiative. And also, engagement relates to our stewardship activities. We have an active and responsible voting policies. In 2023, we reached a 97% voting rate in annual general meetings. We also strongly promote dialogue with corporates and on sustainability issues. This approach to stewardship beyond shareholder engagement is actually key for actors like Ostrum AM, who has a significant exposure in fixed income. And similarly, because of our exposure on fixed income, we have also begun to dialogue with sovereign on the basis of their contribution to the 17 SDGs, and therefore, in particular for climate transition, on the SDG 7 and on the SDG 13. And finally, the fourth pillar of our investment strategies to support the transition is the financing of solutions through the development of thematic strategies with target impact. We thus have launched the Climate and Social Impact Bond Fund, focused on just transition, fully invested in sustainable bonds and categorized as Article 9 according to the SFDR regulation.
Thank you, Nathalie. Overall, how is Ostrum Asset Management positioned today, and what role does the company intend to play in addressing these major transition issues?
Well, Clément, our ambition is actually to be recognized as a leading and a committed partner in sustainable transition for all our stakeholders, particularly our institutional clients. To achieve this, we have established an independent sustainable transition department directly reporting to our CEO, handling CSR, so corporate social responsibility, and ESG issues related to our investment strategies. This department aims to promote sustainable transitions for all our stakeholders, including employees, suppliers, clients, issuers, and all in all, our financial ecosystem. So to this end, we are currently working on 5 key initiatives. The first one is clarifying our position on climate transition, while also continuing to move forward on biodiversity and social issues. For instance, we will be publishing our palm oil exclusion policy by the end of the year. Secondly, we want to complete and strengthen the consistency of our sector and exclusion policies. The idea here is to continue to align with best market practices while also seeking to achieve a minimum level of flexibility to allow us to support more efficiently companies that are willing to transition towards a more sustainable economy. And to do so, we will leverage on the two following initiatives. The first one is to enhance the qualitative aspects of our methodologies and extra financial analysis processes. And the other one is to increase and process further our stewardship initiatives with the development of sectorial engagement frameworks or more transparent escalation process, as well also with a closer monitoring of the outcomes of our engagement initiatives over time. And finally, the fifth initiative is to develop differentiating and complementary thematic fund ranges with a range that could be qualified as pure SRI, complying with stringent requirements of, for instance, the third version of the French SRI label, or with the ESMA fund naming guidelines. A range that will focus on transition, with the aim to finance the transition of the whole economy, including companies in highly emissive sectors. This thematic range will be based on a thorough qualitative analysis via our proprietary methodology for evaluating corporate climate strategies, and will build on strong engagement actions. And last but not least, a range that will focus on impact through our expertise and strong positioning on sustainable bonds, an asset class in which we have more than 40 billion euro of assets under management.
Thank you, Nathalie, for outlining these 5 key initiatives and for reminding us of Ostrum Asset Management's commitment as a leading player in sustainable transitions. Thank you both, Nathalie and Philippe, for these insightful discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clément.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us for this second episode of Transitions, Ostrum Asset Management's podcast. You can find us on all major podcast platforms, our social networks, and our website, www.ostrum.com. See you soon for another edition of Transitions.